Hi everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Now today's video is going to be about a topic that I find very interesting. It's something that I've found myself spending a lot of time researching, just digging into really, and it's something I definitely believe to be true. Today we're going to talk about reincarnation, and one of the first stories that I actually heard about reincarnation that actually really blew my mind, and I just found to be completely fascinating. But before we get into today's video, I just want to send a quick reminder to please consider subscribing and hitting the like button as well. It really does help us grow here on YouTube, especially if you guys like this type of content. We post 2 to 3 times a week. And we talk about stuff like this, like reincarnation. We talk about true crime, paranormal stories, unsolved mysteries, etc., etc. So if that's the kind of content that you like, then please consider subscribing. It would mean the world to both my sister and I. Okay, so let's get into today's story. Now, today's story is about a woman called Dorothy Eady, and she believed for most of her life, really, from a very young age, that she had been an Egyptian priestess. Now, what makes her story so different from a lot of other reincarnation stories is that the information she was able to provide was considered to be quite accurate, if not completely accurate, and it actually helped write and rewrite a lot of the history on ancient Egyptians and civilization. The story begins on January 16th, 1904, when Dorothy was first born. Now, she was born completely fine. She was born to a happy family. Her family had Irish background, but it didn't take very long before a freak accident completely changed Dorothy and her family's life forever. It all started when she was 3 years old and she had actually had an accident. She fell down the stairs and hit her head pretty bad. Now, there were a few conflicting reports that say that she had actually died and then came back to life. And then there were some reports that said that she actually just had a really bad concussion and spent a little bit of time unconscious. But either way, she came back to life and was reporting a lot of weird activity. Soon after, she started demanding her parents, her only parents that she had known her entire life, that she be taken back home immediately. She had this weird feeling that where she was living was not her actual home and that these were not her actual parents. And to make things even weirder for her family, she developed something called foreign accent syndrome, where you basically start developing a foreign accent without actually having traveled or spent any time in that specific culture. And the weird behavior didn't stop there. It actually just kept getting worse and worse. So, because her family was Irish, they were Catholic. So, Dorothy did go to Sunday school. And it got so bad that her Sunday school teacher actually told her parents or requested to her parents that they pulled Dorothy out of school because of the weird things she was saying. Dorothy actually kept comparing Catholicism to heathen Egyptian religions. She actually refused to sing along to a few songs that condemned ancient Egyptians and ancient Egyptian history. So one day, her parents decided to take her to the British Museum. They were living in London at this time. And for those of you that don't know, the British Museum has one of the largest collections of ancient Egyptian artifacts. So taking Dorothy to the British Museum was an interesting way to see if anything that she was saying had any truth to it or if they could take it a little bit further. Dorothy came across this one photo that really just captured her. She stopped looking at everything else in the room and literally just focused on this one photo. And immediately she starts shouting, "There is my home, there is my home." But then it went from instant recognition to almost like complete confusion because she kept asking, "Where are the trees? Where are the gardens?" Now, the photo that she was looking at was a photo of the temple of Seti the First, who was actually the father of Great Ramses. And as soon as she was done admiring the photo, she actually started running around the entire museum, or at least the part where the ancient Egyptian exhibits were. And she started running around and saying that she was home, and she started kissing a bunch of the feet of the different statues that were in that room. So we fast forward to when she was 15. She claimed to have had a nightmare where she said Pharaoh Seti the First actually visited her in her dream. And throughout her teens, she continued to have these very intense dreams and nightmares. She even was experiencing sleepwalking. So all of this odd behavior really freaked out her parents, and they ended up placing her in sanatoriums several times throughout her teenage years. As her teenage years went on, when she wasn't being forced into these sanatoriums, she actually decided to pull out of school. I guess her parents let this happen, or like they homeschooled her. I wasn't able to find much info on that, but she was able to take time away from school and actually travel with her dad. And her dad was in the film industry, so his job actually did allow him to travel quite a bit. So she would tag along with him. And throughout her travels, she would spend as much time as she could in museums, feeding on as much Egyptian history as possible. All of the information that she could find, she would literally just be soaking it all up. By the time she was 27, she had actually been able to secure a job in London with an Egyptian PR magazine. And this is actually where she also met her husband, Iman. In 1931, her and Iman had been married already, and they actually decided to move to Egypt together because Iman was obviously Egyptian. So they moved to Egypt, and as soon as the plane lands and she gets off the plane and starts walking on the ground, she starts basically like begging or lying down on the floor, kissing the sand, saying that she's finally home, she's finally here, and that she's never going to leave. So as the years went on, she actually had a chance encounter with one of the most famous Egyptologists at the time, and his name was George Reasoner. Knowing him and creating the connection she was in Egypt, she was able to coordinate a visit to the temples of the Fifth Dynasty in Unas and Saqqara. And her behavior at these sites was actually reported as being very, very odd, but also in line with the behavior that Egyptologists thought that ancient Egyptians would, the same way that they would actually behave back then. Whenever she would approach any of the pyramids, she always made sure to bring some sort of offering. She would always make sure to remove her shoes or her sandals before entering the pyramids. And she also continued to report these weird dreams. Sometimes she would have nightmares, sometimes she would have out of body experiences. So this paired with what seemed like crazy talk obviously put a strain on her marriage with Iman. In one of these nightmares, she claimed that Horus actually visited her, and he was the one that actually told her the story of her past life. Now, this didn't happen in just one night. It actually took several years and years of Horus visiting her, and each time he would tell her little bits and pieces of her past life, who she was, what happened, and eventually how she died. Now, the story that Horus told her was that she was born into a very poor family. She was a very young girl who went by the name Bentrist. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. They were ancient Egyptian names. A lot of these names aren't used anymore, so they're not very common and they're kind of hard to pronounce. Her mother was a vegetable seller, and her father was a soldier during the reign of Pharaoh Seti I. Unfortunately, in her past life, she was only 3 when her mother died. And because her father was unable to care for her, he actually dropped her off at a temple to be cared for. It's at this temple where she would eventually become a priestess. So she spent her youth growing up in this temple. And when she reached the age of 12, the high priest actually gave her 2 options. He told her that she could actually now leave the temple and go out into the world as her own as a woman, or that she could choose to remain at the temple, but this meant that she had to dedicate her life to the life of a priestess. Not knowing what she was getting herself into and not understanding the requirements that come with being a priestess, she chose to stay in the temple because it provided security for her, basically. Now, by the time she was 14 in her past life, she had actually began a romantic relationship with Pharaoh Seti I. Now, the problem with this is that as a priestess, she's supposed to remain untouched, and getting into any sort of romantic relationship, regardless of who they are, even the pharaoh, is completely forbidden for a priestess. Now, had it been only a relationship, she probably would have been able to keep the secret for quite a while, but unfortunately, she actually ended up getting pregnant at 14. So, unable to hide it anymore, she was kind of forced to tell the high priest who the father was. Now, something of this nature was considered a very, very big offense at that time. So, The high priest ended up telling her that after trial, if she was found guilty, which she likely would be found guilty, the only punishment for this would basically be death. So, not wanting to go through that trial, through that entire ordeal, Dorothy, in her past life, basically decided to end her life, which is how she died. Now, as you can imagine, all of these different stories and this fascination and obsession with Egyptian history started driving a little bit of a wedge between her and her husband, and sadly, they actually did end up getting divorced. But Dorothy didn't really let this drag her down. She actually took this as an opportunity to move closer to Giza and the pyramids. This is where she actually came across another Egyptologist called Semlin Hassan, and he actually ended up employing her as part of his team. And it's been recorded and reported that she was actually a huge help to him and his team, especially when it came to translating hieroglyphics into English. Sadly, in 1956, her job was actually terminated due to defunding. She found herself in a very difficult situation, and she ended up asking Osiris, another Egyptian god, for guidance. She said that he told her she would be offered two options. The first would be a very well-paying job in Cairo, where she would have complete security and she wouldn't have to worry about anything. And then the second job would be a research opportunity in Abydos, but unfortunately that would be a poorly paying job. So obviously, being as obsessed and loyal to her past life and to ancient Egyptian history, she obviously decided to go with the poorly paid position. And also, part of the reason that she chose to go to Abydos is because this is where she believed her past life had taken place. So naturally, after making these really big claims, Dorothy definitely had her fair share of skeptics. There were a lot of people that were saying she was just making this up, that she was a liar, that she was just doing this for attention. And one of the skeptics actually was the head of the Department of Antiquities in Egypt. So they actually decided to put Dorothy to the test. During one of the trips to the temples, she was actually asked to go into several different rooms inside one of the pyramids, and these were all completely darkened. They weren't lit by fire or anything, so she wasn't really able to see anything that was inside the rooms. So they put her in the room and they tell her to face certain walls and ask her to name what was on the wall. Now, what she didn't know is that these walls were covered with famous paintings. She was actually able to name each of these paintings without knowing any information on them. And the funny part is that the Egyptologists at the time had already figured out what the paintings were, except their findings hadn't been published yet at the time. So there's really no way Dorothy could have known the name of any of these paintings. So Dorothy also claimed to know the location of Queen Nefertiti's tomb, which hadn't been discovered at the time and still hasn't been discovered to this day. She claimed it was hidden close to King Tut's tomb, which a lot of Egyptologists thought that was not accurate. It couldn't be true because they figured that there would be no more tombs to be discovered in the Valley of the Kings. They really thought that they had discovered everything that was to be discovered there. So taking that information, they decide to give her the benefit of the doubt, and they start doing some research. They start doing some scanning in the area. Now, although they didn't find the tomb of Queen Nefertiti, they did find several other tombs that they weren't expecting to find. She would actually also claim to know about certain artifacts she would remember seeing in her visions or in her dreams, and she would describe them in detail, but none of these artifacts had actually been found at the time. But during her help with the research teams, they would actually end up discovering quite a lot of these artifacts that she would describe, and they would end up looking the exact same way she said they would. Now, if you remember the part where I mentioned that she had first seen that photo at the British Museum and she started asking about where the gardens were, where the plants and trees had gone, she had actually helped discover the ancient ruins of these ancient gardens. Now, with all of those discoveries under her belt, it definitely put a lot of skeptics to rest. A lot of people do think that this story of Dorothy and her past life as a priestess is definitely true, and it holds quite a lot of merit. A lot of people actually do respect her for the contributions she made to ancient Egyptian history. But sadly, she ended up dying at the age of 77 in 1981. So that's the story of Dorothy Eady. Definitely very interesting, that's for sure. There were a lot of things I don't think she would have been able to know if she was lying. I definitely think she was seeing some things. She was hearing information that she wouldn't have known otherwise. But I know there's definitely a lot of people that don't believe in reincarnation. So let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think that Dorothy was the real deal, or do you think she was making up stories for attention? This is definitely something that she committed to her entire life. It started when she was only 3 up until her death at 77. So that's 74 years of her committing to this one story. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if you like these types of videos, if you guys like it when I talk about reincarnation, please let me know in the comments below. So that does it for me. I will see you guys in the next video.